past weekend was the moment where I put my year of preparation to the test, and I didn't make it. I didn't qualify. And I took off my helmet and I was smiling ear to ear. The reason I was smiling at the moment that I knew that I failed was because I knew I had given everything of myself to try to make this work. Finally, that question got answered. What are my life priorities, and what order are they in terms of priority? My number one goal is to make SMB team the best 360-degree services business to ever exist on planet Earth, and to bring it to as many business owners as I possibly can. That is what I was placed on this planet to do. That is my main purpose. And that's the thing that also happens to have the greatest payoff. My big takeaway from this whole exercise is the importance of Today, I want to talk about ranking your life priorities in order. I had a very interesting experience this past weekend, and I learned a lot about what my top life priorities are and what my top priorities aren't. And yeah, it's a pretty humbling experience. So for the past year, I've been basically somewhat obsessively, I feel like I'm like, admitting that I had an addiction. But, over the past year, I've been like obsessively pursuing a goal to qualify for nationals in dirt bike racing, motocross. And it was my first qualifier, regional championship qualifier, was this past weekend in Indianapolis. And to say it was a learning lesson is definitely an understatement. So if I kind of rewind, back in 2007, I qualified for nationals when I was 15 years old. When I was, newer to the sport, younger, had no other worries in my life. And I ended up taking, years and years off, and I've always come back into the sport, and usually I would try to train for like a big race, and then, I would complete that race, and then I'd kind of lose my juice and I'd stop riding. So I've kind of come in and out of the sport many times over the past, 15 or so years. I guess it's 18 years. And so I've always come back and into and out of the sport. And this year I was super motivated to qualify for nationals in the 30 plus class. And I put in more work than I could ever imagine. I mean, I trained cardio, as I've talked about on prior episodes, 4 days a week. I rode every single weekend. I sacrificed time with my family. I traveled to Ohio, North Carolina, Indianapolis, Northern New York, Virginia, so many different places, and which is a big cost in time. It's a big cost in mental bandwidth, all for basically this pursuit of qualifying for nationals. Now, in addition to this, obviously I'm running a 150 employee company, and there's a lot of responsibilities that come with that. We've welcomed my daughter into the world, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of other variables have happened. And this is kind of like having the sport was really just kind of a productive outlet for me that kind of turned into a obsession of sorts. This past weekend, the reason why I had a ton of these big insights was this weekend was the moment where I put my year of preparation to the test. I've never given myself a full year to prepare for a race like this. I hired a coach. I got my VO2 max to 65, which is something I didn't even know about a year ago. I learned all about cardio zone training, supplementation, really got my nutrition turned around, got to lower body fat than I've been in a very long time. My resting heart rate down to 44 beats a minute. So many so many wins have happened in the past year that have really are things I'll take with me forever in terms of the lessons I've had. And so this past weekend, I had this first kind of test of all this work I put in, and I didn't make it. I didn't qualify. I I got beaten pretty badly. I was probably a top six qualified in every region across the United States. There's a handful of regions. Only 42 racers in the world every year qualify for nationals in each class. So for me to think I would be one of the 42 in the 30 plus open group was pretty unlikely, just because it's basically a class filled with retired pros. And I'm not a pro. I got close to that level, but I never actually pursued a pro card. And I was definitely humbled this weekend. And what was a really gratifying feeling for me was I I got off the track when I knew I was probably around the 15th place position. I got off the track, and my mom actually came to the race with me. And when I got off the track and I got back to the trailer where all of our stuff was parked, and I took off my helmet, and I was smiling ear to ear. And she basically was wondering why I was smiling. And the reason I was smiling was because I finally answered a question in my mind. And that question has always been, for the past, over a decade, is where would I fall if I gave myself, a full year to prepare with no excuses to get myself into the best health shape of my life? Where would I fall on a national scale? And I've always had that question in the back of my mind, because when I first got back in the riding, I didn't really give it my all because I was working at Yellow Pages. Second time I got back in the riding, I didn't really give it my all because I stopped after like 4 or 5 months. Then I tore my ACL, and I had a bunch of kind of hiccups that happen each time I've gotten into the sport in the past, which caused me to always have this question in the back of my mind, which is, what could I do if I didn't have these interruptions and if I actually gave it my all, right? And the reason I was smiling at the moment that I knew that I failed was because I knew I had given everything of myself to try to make this work. I did everything within my control to make this work, right? And there is no feeling better than that feeling, right? To know when I was on the starting line of that race, there was nothing else I could have done to prepare, right? And when I got off the track, I felt this sense of peace, almost like a weight was lifted off my shoulders from all this anticipation, all these questions. And finally that question got answered, which is basically validation that what I'm doing in business is what I should be doing, right? There's a reason I'm not a professional racer. There's a reason I didn't become professional. It's because it's not my main thing, right? It's an outlet for me. And dirt biking was becoming more than an outlet. It was becoming a second job. Over the past year, I basically give myself no time off. I mean, it's been high performance output running a business during the week and having all the responsibility and stress that comes with that. And then every weekend has been immediately, riding 170, 180 beats per minute, max cardio exertion multiple days a week. And then there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, like I mentioned, travel, bike work. It's not an easy sport to do. It's not like playing basketball where there's local basketball courts everywhere around you. The closest track to me, for me to ride my dirt bike, is probably like 90 minutes away, an hour to 90 minutes away. And that's each way. So for me to just ride one day takes, 2 to 3 hours of round trip driving, not to mention loading a trailer, not to mention bike work, which has to be done every single week when you ride the bike. We're talking, oil changes, changing, chain sprockets, parts on the bike breaking, replacing parts, washing the bikes. I mean, there's like endless work, right? And so I go back to my trailer after this race. I have this insight, and I realized that the big insight for me was that my priorities in life were misaligned. Right, I was putting so much my mental emphasis into something, dirt bike racing, that really didn't have much of a payoff other than a personal gratification payoff of knowing, I guess I qualified for nationals, right? So I started reflecting on, like, why do I do this sport, right? Well, because I love adrenaline. I love things with two wheels, right? That's why, I do mountain biking, road biking. Um, I have an electric bike. I have, I anything bikes. That's what I grew up doing. That's my passion. That's what I love doing, right? But I love the thrill of racing. I love the adrenaline. But the reason I was doing it, and am doing it, is because I'm doing it for as an outlet and as a fun, competitive kind of pursuit, right? So I'm at this race. We're in Indianapolis. You can imagine the travel to get there, right? Um, and the work just to get there for that. So I'm sitting there and I'm just like, why am I doing this? I'm just questioning the big questions to myself. And I realize I'm doing this for fun, right? And it's not my main goal, right? Because even if I do qualify, I'm not doing it for money. If anything, not if anything, the sport is a money drain. Even if I won nationals, I would be losing, $50,000 to $60,000 a year just for this fun passion outlet, right? It is an expensive sport, right? So what's the real payoff? Well, the real payoff is the gratification that I have of having a fun, passionate outlet, right? So I started realizing, like, I had my goals wrong. I turned something that was fun to me into a job, right? And I realized that I don't need to put all these crazy expectations on myself and all this anticipation, because it kind of robs the fun of having this outlet. I'm going to continue putting high expectations on myself in business because that's my main goal, right? But I'm not going to continue doing that for dirt bike racing. I'm going to treat it as a fun outlet. I'm going to kind of, as weird as it sounds, I've never really said this before, but, like, I'm going to lower the bar a little bit. I'm not, because the payoff is not worth it, right? The injury risk, the time expense, all the other expenses for personal gratification, like, I set the bar a little bit too high for something that's payoff isn't worth it, right? And it's not my top priority. So then this led to the topic of today's session, which is basically, like, what are my life priorities and what order are they in terms of priority, right? So I realized I started writing out all my goals, which I recite every single morning. And I started kind of writing my goals out again and thinking, okay, well, what's number one? What's number two? What's number three? What's number four, right? What's number five? And I started, like, writing out the trade-offs of having each goal as number one, right? And because I didn't do this exercise, I let something that really wasn't my number one goal become close to my number one goal, right? So as weird as it sounds, I reminded myself that my personal number one goal is scaling SMB team. And I am on the same page with my wife about that, same page with my family, same page with friends. Like, that is my number one goal. My number one goal is to make SMB team the best 360-degree services business to ever exist on planet Earth, and to bring it to as many business owners as I possibly can. That is what I was placed on this planet to do. That is my main purpose. And that's the thing that also happens to have the greatest payoff, right? It's the thing where, the companies where all my net worth is tied up. It allows me to have a substantial impact on other people's lives, our coaching business especially. It allows me to have an impact on my employees' lives. It allows me to have the biggest possible impact for my family's legacy in terms of, the financial aspect of the business. There's so many rewards to this, right? Whereas if I compare it to motocross racing, what's the reward other than just internal satisfaction, right? Who do I really benefit other than myself for qualifying for nationals and doing all this stuff that actually costs stuff with other people. I can't hang out with my friends, other friends on weekends. I can't be there with my family as much as I'd like to. So it actually takes away from my impact on other people, right? So is my little personal gratification worth subtracting away from other relationships in my life? Right? That this is kind of the thinking process. So number one for me is SMB. Once I've identified what number one is, I know what I am willing to make the most sacrifices around, right? The thing I'm willing to make the most sacrifices around is my business, is SMB team, right? So now that that's clear, I now know which goals of mine I'm willing to sacrifice more around and which ones I'm not willing to sacrifice more around, right? So that ended up being my number one goal, right? My number two goal ended up being my health, right? So I want my mental, my physical, and my emotional health every single week to be in a better place than it was last week, right? So what does that mean? That means my nutrition, my exercise, my supplementation, my meditation, all of these things have to be on track every single week for me to finish this week and to go, hell yeah, this week I felt better than I did last week, right? And that ended up being my number two goal. So again, what things am I willing to do to make sacrifices around that, right? Well, I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of the intensity of motocross racing because there's injury risk there. If I get injured, I'm not able to work out and my fitness suffers, right? And therefore my health suffers, right? So these things all tie in together, but knowing my priorities now, knowing S&B is number one, my health is number two, right? That allows me to know where I can make sacrifices. Number three was clear to me that me being a father is critically important to me. Me being there for my daughter, and even as funny as it sounds, my dog Jade, who I'm a doggy dad to her. That's important. This is the one time in my life I'm going to be able to, be there in my daughter's early development. And, not being there as much as I'd like to kind of is painful, right? And I had to realize that. Fourth ended up being my relationship with my wife. I want to be a great husband, right? So that ended up being the fourth goal in list of priority, right? And but again, knowing that SMB comes first, that is also a sacrifice, and something my wife and I are on the same page with. That means, like, if I have to sacrifice something as a dad in order to take advantage of a great opportunity for SMB team, I'm willing to take that sacrifice, right? Because right now I'm in the legacy building period of my life, right? So the opportunity cost of, missing out on a $20 million opportunity for SMB team, right? Just to like be there for one kind of, I guess, experience that would make me, quote unquote, a better father or a better husband. These are trade-offs that need to be discussed and openly communicated with my wife, Emily, and trade-offs that need to be decided on, right? And that's not a popular viewpoint. But if you're clear on your priorities, then you don't have to feel guilty about the things that you have to give up in order to pounce on the things that are most important to you at your current stage of life. Now, if I have already made it in SMB team and I'm already where I need to be in success, then I can change these priorities, right? But those were the top four priorities. And then fifth ended up being motocross racing, right? And because I didn't go through this exercise before, I was honestly, motocross racing was kind of battling for first place in my head. I know deep down SMB was still my top priority just based on where I was spending my time and energy. But there were weeks where it felt like dirt biking was getting close to that number one spot. It was becoming, again, an obsession of sorts, right? So in this level of reflection, putting motocross fifth, putting racing fifth on this list of priorities, was an eye-opening experience for me, because once you know what categories of life priorities you have, you're able to audit where you spend your time, where you spend your money, where you spend your energy, and it should be in direct proportion of what your top priorities are, right? So, obviously, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, or let's say if we look at it as a filled bucket of 100%, right? Let's say I'm okay with spending 50, or let's say 60% of my time on S&B team, right? Well, if I look at my calendar for any given week, 60% of my time at least should be spent on S&B team, right? Okay. Is that true? If I'm spending only 20% of my time on S&B team, I need to up my time investment to match my priorities, right? Vice versa, in dirt bike racing, if I'm spending 50% of my week on dirt bike racing, but it's only 10% of where I want to spend my time and focus, that's a huge misalignment. I'm spending 5 times more on something I should only be spending 10% of my time on, right? So being aware of whether your time investments match up with your life priorities by order of priority was a super liberating experience for me. So I felt so peaceful this week, so peaceful knowing that this battle I've signed myself up for of running a high growth company and giving myself no time off on weekends and training, I feel so much more at peace now knowing what I'm willing to take sacrifices on and what I'm willing to take less sacrifices on, right? So I'm not giving up, dirt biking. I'm not stopping. I'm still going to race. I'm just going to race more, local and regional things. I'm still going to try for nationals this year, but I'm not going to put crazy pressure on myself. I'm just going to do it for fun. I'm going to reduce the expectations that I've been putting on myself and truly just treat this as the outlet that it's meant to be, instead of putting these crazy expectations on myself. So my big takeaway from this whole exercise is the importance of feedback analysis, right? Feedback analysis is it's probably one of the most powerful lessons I've ever learned in life, really. It's from Peter Drucker, book Managing Oneself. I learned about this concept very early on and when I got started in business. And what feedback analysis as a concept says is basically, when you set a goal in your life, right, the universe will give you clear feedback if you set a clear goal, right? So if I set a clear goal, the universe is going to give me clear feedback, right? So example here, I set a clear goal to qualify for nationals, right? I put in a year of work to do it. And the clear feedback from that clear goal was, Bill, you're not really fast enough, or you can't invest the time needed, and or you're not fast enough to qualify for nationals. That's what feedback showed me, right? Now, because the payoff, now if this happened in business, right? I mean, there's so many times I've failed at goals I've set in business. If I just gave up every single time I failed at something, I wouldn't be where I'm at in business right now, because persisting through failure is what's got me to where I'm at in business, right? But you have to know what failures to persist through and which ones to not persist through, which battles you want to fight, right? So if I had trained a year and I qualified, then the feedback would have been, Bill, why weren't you doing this before? This was easy. You need to continue doing this. That would have been the feedback. But the feedback for me to be in 15th place when I needed to be in 6th place to qualify, not even close to the mark, I need to do a good job listening to the feedback that life gives me, right? And the truth is, if I reflect over my life, it's funny, I look through after this race, I look through some of my past results. It's funny how things don't really change over time, especially in individual sports, which I'll explain in a second. I looked at my last result that I did at a regional championship, and it was in 2010, and I got 14th place at the regional, right? And isn't it funny that, 18 years after that, or actually that would be 18. That'd be 15 years after that. I was around 18 when I did that. 15 years after that, I'm at another regional and I'm running around 15th place, right? One position away from what I finished 15 years ago, right? So sometimes things don't really change, right? I mean, I may be 15 years older than when I got 14th at a regional, 15 years ago, but things don't really change. My habits are not going to really change that much. My gifts aren't going to really change that much. I can't rewire my brain completely at 33 years old, right? So this comes down to the concept of embracing your gifts, right? Now, in a sport like dirt biking, it's an individual sport, right? So I can't leverage a team. I can't leverage resources. I can't delegate as well as I could in a business, right? So that ended up being one of my skills in business is I'm able to delegate. I'm able to give other people authority and responsibility. And you're not able to do that in an individual sport, right? So there's limits to my abilities in the sport of something like dirt biking as an individual sport, right? So feedback analysis, again, if you give the universe clear goals, it'll give you clear feedback. The clear feedback is maybe I was pursuing the wrong goal and maybe I need to edit my expectations a little bit, right? Now, how have I used feedback analysis in business? Well, I've used it kind of really in more of the opposite way is what are things that I've set clear goals around and I crushed, right? And I want to double down on those things because that's an indication of a gift of mine, right? Or a gift of the organization. So an example, like back in 2020 when COVID hit, I held a webinar, and my fourth webinar ever, I had 3,700 attorneys on it, right? That was a huge win. So I used feedback analysis. I set a clear goal to hold a webinar. Market gave me clear feedback, basically said, Bill, you're really good at webinars. You should do more public speaking and webinars like this, right? So I kept doing webinars, right? And then that turned into the big virtual events that we do, right? And now we hold the biggest virtual events in our industry. And it all came from doubling down on what worked, right? Just like shaving away things that don't work, right? I remember when I got started at SMB team, there were plenty of things I was terrible at. One of which was accounting. I was the one that ran all of our clients' credit cards at one point in time. I did all the billing follow-up. It was horrific. It drained my energy. I missed details all the time. I forgot to bill people. It was not my gift because it wasn't a creative task. It wasn't a persuasive task. It was really like a high detail data admin task, which I was really bad at. So I hired someone to do that for me. And that's the beautiful thing in business is when you find things you're not good at, you can find someone to replace yourself in that thing. And you can't do that in an individual sport, right? So that's why I love business so much is because it gives you the flexibility to double down in your business on the areas in which you're gifted, but also to delegate in the areas where you're not gifted, right? And I think overall, generally speaking, the feedback analysis shows that I am much better at running a business than I am at riding a dirt bike, comparatively speaking, right? I mean, what I've accomplished in business is much more impressive than what I've accomplished as a dirt bike racer. And that's just universe feedback, right? That's all data that allows me, you, if you use this process, to inspect what reality is telling you is working and what reality is telling you is not working. The worst thing you could ever do that I've done 1,000,001 times is to either be ignorant to the signs that the universe is giving you or to see the signs and not acknowledge them, right? Those are the worst places to be in, right? Because I promise you, if you look for it, the universe is going to show you what you thrive at and what you do not thrive at. It's going to show you. The question is, are you going to be aware of it? And are you going to embrace it? And are you going to make decisions based on it, right? So my takeaway for this week's podcast is really to put yourself, and just like I did, I challenge you to put yourself through kind of a life priority audit. Get your life priorities in order and in order of importance. Understand what sacrifices you're willing to take for each priority, what you're not willing to take, and come to peace with what's number one in your book, what's number two, what's number three, what's number four, or however many priorities you have, so that you can go to bed at night knowing that the main thing is the main thing, the second thing is the second thing, the third thing is the third thing, the fourth thing is the fourth thing. Sounds simple, but there is a million and one things that you could do to dial in your productivity and your focus, and I think this is one of the most important things. So I hope you got value from this episode, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay great. If you found value in this podcast, here's one way I can help your firm right now. First, you can get our new book, Law Firm Growth Accelerator. It's everything we've learned over 10 plus years helping lawyers build thriving, profitable firms. The strategies that you'll get in this book work for any practice area and any revenue level. You can get the audiobook and ebook 100% free, or just cover the shipping and we'll send you the physical copy to you in addition to the audio and ebook. Go to smbteam.com/book to get your copy.